Welcome, welcome, welcome. Second Sunday of January. And God has put it on my heart a sermon series titled Bitter to Better. Bitter to Better. And one thing about the word that you've been hearing me say a lot for the past few Sundays is thrive. Someone say thrive. Thrive, and thrive means to grow and develop vigorously. Grow and develop strongly. And I don't know about you, but I want to thrive in areas of my life. I want to thrive financially. I want to thrive health related. I want to thrive in my marriage, in my parenting. I want to thrive. And I want us to thrive as a church. But when in my time with God, and I'll think about this word thrive, in order for us to thrive, in order for us to grow, we need to deal with some bitterness in our hearts. I know, we don't want to talk about that. The bitterness in our hearts. We need to deal with the bitterness, the resentment, the unforgiveness, the offenses that we're holding on to for so long that's preventing us from growing. So if you want to thrive, you need to tackle this bitterness. That's right. You want to thrive. See, bitterness will make it hard to grow. Because if you are growing with bitterness, you're growing in the wrong direction, which is possible. It's possible to grow in the wrong direction. That's what an ingrown hair is, right? It's a hair that's growing in the wrong direction. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to grow in the wrong direction because all the men out here, ingrown hair is hurt. Like, I'll be like, man, you want to pop. It's painful, and I don't want to have that type of growth. I want to have the growth that I'm seeing that people can see the God in me. People can see God moving in my life. People can see God opening doors for me and being a testimony to what God is doing in his earthly kingdom. That's the type of growth I'm talking about. So we need to tackle some bitterness. Someone say bitter to better. Bitter to better. And a lot of us are bitter because of what someone did to us and we trusted that person. Or what someone did and we loved that person. We believed in that person and they hurt us in a way. They made us upset. They gave us hard feelings. So we're bitter because of what someone did. We're bitter because of what our mother did, what our parents did, what our father did, what our friend did, what our spouse did. We're bitter. But one of the bitterness I want to talk about is the bitterness that comes from what God did. God allows something to happen to you, and you now have a little bitterness in your heart. You feel some type of way. Come on, this sermon, we have to be honest. I know I'm not the only one that felt some type of way when God allowed something to happen in my life that made me upset, that hurt me in such a way, that disappointed me. And we can experience that type of bitterness. And today, in the first sermon of this series, we're going to look at the life of a king. Look at a life of a king that walked with God, that talked with God, that did everything right in the eyes of the Lord, yet God allowed something to happen to him that produced some bitter feelings on the inside. And that's the life of King Hezekiah. Hezekiah. So today's text is coming from 2 Kings chapter 20. And we're going to look at the first three verses. 2 Kings chapter 20, verses 1 through 3. You can read it on the screen if you're in the house and online. In those days, Hezekiah became sick and was at the point of death. And Isaiah, the prophet, the son of Amoz, came to him and said to him, "Thus says the Lord, set your house in order, for you shall die, you shall not recover." Then Hezekiah turned his face to the wall and prayed to the Lord, saying, Now, O Lord, someone say, O Lord, O Lord, please remember how I have walked before you in faithfulness and with a whole heart, not with some of my heart, not with a piece of my heart, but a whole heart, and have done what is good in your sight. And Hezekiah wept bitterly. And Hezekiah wept bitterly. The subject for today's sermon, the subject today, family, is feeling salty. Feeling salty. Type it in the chat. Feeling salty. I don't know about you. I know I'm not alone, but I'm not afraid to admit there's times in my life when God did something, allowed something to enter my life, and it had me feeling salty. If I'm not alone, say you're not alone. You know, there's times in my life, and there are times in our lives when God did something. God allowed something to happen, and it made us upset. Because let's be honest, can we really be honest? We say, let your will be done, but what happens when his will conflicts with what we want? What happens when what he has for us, his plans for us, produces some bitter feelings on the inside? Like, God, I didn't want that. Yes. God, I didn't think you was going to move like that. What happened when God's hand moves in such a way and now we feeling salty? When God's hand moves in such a way and we now have a little resentment in our heart, have some bitterness in our hearts, and we have some hard feelings towards God. You ever had hard feelings towards God? You didn't understand why he did what he did, but he did it anyway? Hard feeling. Feeling salty. Say feeling salty. Feeling salty. You are feeling salty because it was something that God allowed to happen to you. And Hezekiah was feeling salty because what God allowed to happen to him. Yes. Hezekiah is feeling a little salty because this brother about to die. And he like, God, I walked with you. I was faithful, and he about to die. And to understand truly why Hezekiah felt the way he felt, we need to look at the life of Hezekiah. Hezekiah was the 13th king of Judah. He became king at 25 years old, and he was known for his obedience. The Bible said he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. He walked with God. He was faithful to God. He talked with God. He stood out in the eyes of God because of his obedience. Someone say obedience. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, and he was blessed for that. See, obedience, when you're walking in obedience, you will stand out. And that's the type of standout I want to be. I don't want to stand out for doing wrong. I want to stand out for doing what was right in the eyes of the Lord. And Hezekiah stood out. He stood out so much that after him, none was like him. So he was unique. He was one of a kind. And when you do what is right in the eyes of the Lord, you will be one of a kind. God will have you stand out. Someone say stand out. Obedience. He stood out because of that. And because of his faithfulness to God, because that he did what was right in the eyes of God, because he followed God's commands. Check this out. Guess what God did? Wherever he went, God was with them and he prospered. Wherever Hezekiah went, Hezekiah prospered because of his obedience in the eyes of the Lord. Now, here's the thing we need to catch. The Bible says wherever he went, he prospered. It does not mean he didn't face trials. It did not mean he didn't face storms. It did not mean he didn't face trouble, but he prospered. Yeah. And so wherever you go, and it's that is not a promise that you're not going to face no hard times. That's not a promise that you're not going to go through some stuff. That's not a promise, but you will prosper. The steps of a good man are ordered by God. So when God's ordering your steps and he has you walk through a door, you will prosper in the face of adversity. You will prosper in the face of resistance, in the face of opposition, in the face of oppression, in the face of all this type of stuff that the enemy can throw at you, you will prosper. All because the Bible says you will prosper wherever you go. That's not an exemption from life, because you will go through some things. That's right. You will be tested. You will be tried. But guess what, church? You will prosper when you hold on to God, follow His commands, and you obedient. You walk in the eyes of the Lord. You will prosper. And Hezekiah prospered wherever he went because he followed the commandments of the Lord. You see what obedience, that's why don't strive to be perfect. Strive to be obedient. God blesses obedience. God loves obedience. He blesses. You're going to slip every now and then, but get up, fix yourself up, and keep on walking. Keep on walking. When you do what you're supposed to do, you will stand out. And Hezekiah stood out because of his obedience, which was very remarkable given who his father was. Yeah. Hezekiah was a man of obedience. His father wasn't. His father stood out for the wrong reason. His father, King Ahaz, was one of the worst kings of Judah. And all this is going to make sense. He was the worst king of Judah. And studies show that the time King Ahaz was in reign, he was the first bad king of Judah in about 100 years. So I don't want to be known for being the worst at something. He is known for being one of the worst kings of Judah. The Bible says he did not do what was right in the eyes of the Lord. He did not do. And so kings before him, previous kings, they slipped up every now and then, which is, we're human. We slip up. They slipped up every now and then. But King Ahaz, he purposely did what was not right in the eyes of the Lord. He purposely did not walk with God. Instead of walking with God, he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel, which was not the smartest decision at the time. No, that wasn't the smartest decision. Be careful who you walk with. Be careful who you walk with. He walked in the ways of the king of Israel, and that was the downfall. The Bible said, blessed is the man who does not walk in the ways of the wicked. Walk in the ways. Be careful who he walked in the ways of the king of Israel. Which, if we dig a little deep, if you follow me even more, who remember King Solomon? King Solomon, one of the wisest men to ever live. After the death of King Solomon, the house of Israel was split into two kingdoms. You had the northern kingdom, north side, as I like to say, who retained the name Israel. So you had the kingdom of Israel, which was the north side. Then you had the kingdom of Judah, which is the south side, the southern kingdom. Now, the difference is the northern kingdom of Israel devoted themselves not following the paths of God. They devoted themselves to doing wrong. They devoted themselves to not walking in the ways of the Lord. It was full of paganism. They worshiped the Baals. They did not do what was right. And so the northern kingdom of Israel was full of nothing but ungodly kings, where the kingdom of Judah was a mixture of godly and ungodly kings. So although King Ahaz was the king of Judah, he followed the ways of the Israel kings. Although they was doing wrong, so that in a sense, he started doing wrong because he's walking with them. And that's why I need to be careful who you choose to walk with, which he adopted the behavior of the kings of Israel. And that messed up the nation of Judah. Because of his decision to walk in the ways of Israel, it messed up the nation of Judah, because the role of kings at the time was to be the moral representative of the nation. So the moral state of the king was equal to the moral state of the people. And so if the king is jacked up, the nation is jacked up. And so because of King Ahaz, he was jacked up and following and not following the ways of the Lord and worshiping other gods. So now when Hezekiah ascended to the throne, he is walking into a jacked up situation. He is walking into a jacked up situation. Now he has to change the culture. Ain't nothing worse. It's hard to change a culture. I know it happens a lot with sports. When new coaches come into the mix, they have to change the culture every now and then. You have to change the culture every now and then. And Judah, the culture, Hezekiah had to change because under his father, they did not worship the one true God. And so Hezekiah did all he could to change the hearts of Judah because it was a messed up culture. He had to undo the damage his father did. And to all the parents, you have to position your kids for success. Position your kids. I don't want to just be so messed up and my kid has to come and start from the bottom. We need to give our kids a head start. A head start. Most communicate kids, instead of I'm big on financial debt and I'm big on that. I don't want to pass all that on to my children. Let me tackle it now, and so they can walk into something a little more easy. They don't have to grind from the bottom. I want to set a path that they can walk on that make life a little more easy. They still gonna face some things every now and then, but at least it'll be a little more easy. I don't want them to go through what I went through. But King Ahaz put his son into a terrible situation where his son got to do all this work to turn the hearts of the people back. And turning the hearts of some grown people is hard, especially when they're so used to doing things a certain way. But King Hezekiah did it. He rid the land of idols and turned the hearts of the people back to the one true God. Yeah. Under his reforms, revival came to Judah. So here he is. He obedient. He doing what is right. He faithful. He just turned the hearts of a nation back to God. And now in this text, he's getting news that he's about to die. What man wouldn't feel some type of way? God, I did all this for what? Let's be honest. God, I did all this. I did all this work for you, and now you about to have me die. Why? Why would you have me do all this when you're just going to kill me? It doesn't make sense. And so we will have some hard feelings. Someone say hard feelings. And you will feel a little salty. And let's be honest, how many of you have asked yourself or asked God, why would you do this to me? Of all people, why me? Why me? Of all people. Of all people, why would you allow me to experience this? And how many of you have read your resume to God? Look at all the stuff I did for you. That's what Hezekiah did in this text. God, remember how I walked with you. Remember how my father did all that damage to your people? And remember when I had to come in and I did all this? Just remember it. I just want you to remember. And we come to that every night because we're human. We're going to have those type of feelings. We're going to have those feelings of saltiness. But let's not allow those bitter feelings to overlook that God still loves us. And that's why we should not be afraid to be honest with God. He can handle it. You feel some type of way, God, this is how I'm feeling because of what you did. This is how I'm feeling because of what happened to me. What you allowed to happen to me. Because that's the hard thing to wrap our minds around. Because when God allows something to happen to you. Why would you permit this in my life? You love me. I'm a child of God. I'm faithful to you. I go to Bible study. I go to church every Sunday. I tithe. I give to the needy. I do all this stuff, and you allow this to happen to me. Yeah. That doesn't make sense. And you have some bitter feelings. You have some bitter feelings. A little salty because of what God did. Not what your mama did, not what your brother did, not what. It's hard to accept when God does something to us. Because we want his will to be done. We said, let your will be done. Let your will be done. Then his will is done. Okay, now, wait a second. Now, you should have told me what you was going to do. And I wouldn't have prayed for your will to be done. You should have gave me a head. But the thing is, God was so kind to Hezekiah, he gave him a heads up. He gave him time to get his house in order. And people don't get that. A lot of people don't get that. A time to get your house in order. And so we need to look at some of the bright sides of it. God didn't have to tell Hezekiah that he was about to die and to get your house in order. God is still kind. Even when he does something that we necessarily don't like, he's still kind. Even when he does something that goes against what we wanted, he's still kind. He still loves us. He's still so kind, and his grace and mercy is still with us. God, and I said, God being God, God just being the kind God he is, he didn't have to give Hezekiah a heads up, but he did it anyway. He did it anyway. And Hezekiah was bitter. And to really get the nitty-gritty details of how Hezekiah felt, the way he felt, his mindset at the time, we need to go to Isaiah's recount of this same story. The same Isaiah that passed the news like, hey, bro, you about to die. Get your house in order. Hezekiah did a recount of the same story, but in his recount, he gave us more details about how Hezekiah felt, his mindset at the time. Hezekiah's lament in Isaiah chapter 38, verse 10. This is Hezekiah's lament, his expression of grief. And what really stood out about his expression of grief was that Hezekiah said, in the prime of my life, I must go through the gates of death. In the prime of my life, I must go through the gates of Sheol, which is Hebrew for death, the grave. I must go to that, and I'm being robbed the rest of my years. Have you ever felt like God robbed you of an opportunity? That's deep. You ever felt like you've been robbed of an opportunity by God? God allows something. Hezekiah said, I'm being robbed the rest of my years. That's an interesting word he used, robbed. I'm being robbed the rest of my years. And when you think about that, there's times in our life where we felt like God robbed us of an opportunity because of what he permitted in our lives. Something happened to us and we was robbed of an opportunity to say goodbye to a loved one. We were robbed of an opportunity to see our child grow old. We were robbed of an opportunity to see our spouse grow old, to grow old with our spouse. We were robbed of an opportunity. God, I was falsely accused. I'm being robbed of freedom because of what you allowed to happen to me, God. And those can produce feeling saltiness inside when we felt like we were robbed of something. You permitted this in my life. And now I'm being robbed of an opportunity. So think about it. Have you ever felt like God robbed you of an opportunity? An opportunity you longed for, an opportunity you cared for, an opportunity you really wanted, and God robbed you of that. You felt like God brought you this far to leave you. I know we just sung, he didn't bring me this far to leave, but there's times in our life when in the middle of storms, we're not really thinking clear. We just think that, okay, God, you did this, and now you're not here. Robbed you. He said, I'm being robbed the rest of my years. In the prime years of my life, and that really stood out. In the prime years of my life, prime. Having me die when I'm young, having me die when I'm old, that's cool, but don't have me die in my prime. Because when something ends in its prime, we left with the lingering question of what if? When something ends in its prime, we left with what if? What if? We do it a lot in sports. In sports, when a player gets injured in their prime, people start having, hey, what if they never got hurt? What type of career they would have had? What if that player never broke his ankle? What type of career would they have? We left with a lingering question of what if? And here it is. Hezekiah is saying, in the prime years of my life, I have to die. Not when I'm young, not in the prime. In the 14th year, in this text, he in his 14th year of being king. And he said, this is my prime, baby. I'm moving, I'm grooving, we making it happen, Lord. Now you about to have me die in the prime years of my life. And in the prime, when something ends in its prime, you left with the lingering question of what if? Some businesses were in their prime when COVID came, shut down. And you left with, dang, I wonder where my business would have been if that shutdown never happened. You left with the lingering question of what if? What if? What if that didn't end in its prime? You can only imagine what could have been. And when you think about that, when you think about what it could have been, you can become bitter. You can become salty. You felt like your marriage was in its prime and your spouse passed away and you feeling salty. Like, man, we was just getting it. We was just in our groove. We was making it happen. Now, God, you allowed this to happen. When something ends in its prime, you left with some bitter feelings because you just left with what if and the imagination, what could have been if that never happened. What could have been if your marriage never ended. What could have been if your child never passed away. What could have been. What could have been if what you loved, what you were in its prime and it never ended? What it could have been. I feel so sorry, especially like when I know a lot of entrepreneurs, like some people just started their business, they dream, they were happy, God, this is going great, and then it had to come to an abrupt end. Churches had to come to an end, and you left with a what if? What if COVID never happened and the shutdown never happened? And you can only imagine. Some pastors out there are just only imagining what a church could have been if that never happened. And it can produce, if not managed carefully, it can produce some bitter feelings on the inside. But the thing about God, see, we look at the prime of our life when God can use us no matter what age we are. God doesn't, so we can only be used during our prime years. Our prime years are the most effective year, but God can use any year as an effective year. Any year as a way to get his will done. Don't believe me? Just ask Sarah. Sarah was well beyond the prime years of her life of bearing a child. Well behind. So in the prime years of her life, she didn't bear a child. But God used her in her old age to bear a child. And so Isaac is just proof that God can use you outside of your prime years. And so to all the young people watching, the older people watching, you don't have to just be in the prime years of your life to be used by God. God can use you when you're old. God can use you when it's young, because that's how God is. God's time is not our time. The prime years of my life. So that's why you have to be careful not to allow those feelings of what if produce bitterness inside our hearts. Because for a while, I was bitter. I was bitter towards God because I remember 2010, in my freshman, sophomore year, all I'd wanted to do was play college basketball. And, it wasn't social media popping at the time, so I was doing everything myself, making my own videos, making my own mixtapes and all highlights and all that stuff, sending it. And then I almost had an opportunity my second year of college. I'm with the team, we practicing. I'm doing 6 a.m. workouts, between class workouts, open gyms, all this work. I'm like, God is making this happen for me. I'm feeling good, feeling great. And then when it came time to really make it official, and I went to the coach office, and you know how when somebody have a conversation, you see it's not going the way you intended. I was like, okay, this ain't. And my heart just kept dropping more and more and more. And then I left the meeting, and I was upset. I was hurt because I felt like God brought me that far and got my hopes up just to let me down. I wasn't upset with the coach. I was just upset with God, because why would he allow me to experience all this to just not let it happen? And I remember that story very vivid, very clearly, because it was like when y'all remember Pursuit of Happiness, that movie with Will Smith, and he slept in the subway station with his son crying. That was me. I went right into that bathroom gym and I let it out. Oh, I let God have it. Let's be honest. Come on now. I know I'm not the only one, but I felt like he let me down. And I was salty. For a while, I was salty. But the thing is, at that time, I didn't know I was salty at God. So I'm sitting here, the coach, the team, I'm having all these salty feelings. I'm still around them because I like to play basketball, but I'm like, I hope they lose. I hope they lose, because he's going to regret making this decision. I would have made that shot. I'm just saying, coach. I'm just saying. But then when I mature, I'm like, okay, I wasn't really mad at them. I was upset with God. Feeling salty. And I was feeling salty. Not anymore. That was years ago. But at that time, I was big mad. I was mad. But what areas of your life what areas are you in your life where you feel salty with God? What areas in your life are you feeling salty? Are you upset that God allowed this to happen to you and you felt like it was unfair? Because that's what bitterness is. You felt like you was treated unfairly. You felt like it wasn't right. It disappointed you. It hurt you. It made you upset. And so now it's produced bitterness on the inside. So now you're feeling salty about it. What areas in your life are you feeling like that? What areas in your life are you feeling like that? And then this text, that's how Hezekiah felt. In his lament, in the prime years of my life, God about to have me die. And he felt like God was robbing him of an opportunity to live out the prime years of his life. Because at that time when Hezekiah got the news, he was already going through some stuff. He was already dealing with some stuff. Because 3 words that we should not overlook in this text are "in those days." In those days. So during this time frame when Hezekiah was sick and received this news he was about to die, he was already dealing with some mess. And that's with Assyria. He's already dealing with Assyria, the king of Assyria, King Sennacherib, which is a weird name, but hey, he was already dealing with him. Assyria, because Assyria was the dominant power at the time. So they just conquered the northern kingdom of Israel. So Israel's exiled now, so Assyria is working its way towards Judah. And so Hezekiah, I got to deal with this King Sennacherib dude because he ain't playing. He ain't going. He want this. He's having to deal with him. And that's the thing. But so when he got this news that he became sick and was about to die in the days that Assyria is going after Judah. Isn't that crazy how storms are? Storms in life are impolite. They're inconsiderate. They don't care about what you're already going through. They just come when they come. That's right. Life just happens when it happens. And sometimes it's not the storm itself. It's the timing of the storm. I can handle a flat tire. But if I'm already having a bad day, I'm running late to things, and my mind just going crazy and all this stuff going on, and then I get a flat tire, now I'm just, that's it. That's the nail in the coffin right there. I'm done. I am done. Because it's the timing of the storm. If storms came one at a time, they'll be cool. Can handle that. A lot of us wish that storms was he already going through something. I'm just going to wait. I'm not going to bother him. It's like when you see somebody in a meeting, you're like, I don't even want to bother them right now. I'm just going to wait till it's over. Or you see somebody already having a bad day, I'm just going to wait. I don't want to add on to this. I don't want to pile on mess. But life don't care. Life will pile on some mess. Mess on top of mess on top of mess on top of mess. And that can blow. it just becomes so much. And in those days, Hezekiah is already having to deal with this dude, with Assyria trying to take over Judah. And in those days, he became sick. God permitted this sickness to happen during the time that he's trying to protect Jerusalem. He's trying to protect, and now he's sick. Like, God, I'm trying to protect your people, and now I'm sick, and I'm about to die? And the Bible doesn't say what type of sickness it was. He was just sick. The text doesn't say, oh, he was suffering this and something. No, it just said he was sick and he about to die. There was no Vicks Vapor Rub back then. He was sick. Was going to get cleared. But I felt like if he was living in the days of my great-grandmother, Granny, she would have slapped some Vicks Vapor Rub on him and he would have been healed. Well, I felt like that would have cured a lot of diseases back then. Leprosy, slap some Vicks on you and you'll be good to go. Robitussin. They would have, if he would have had an old school grandma like mine, he would have got healed. But there was nothing back then. There was no Robitussin, no Vicks, so he was just about to I don't know what I got, but I'm about to die apparently. But he became sick during this time. But in the midst of all this storm, in the midst of the news, in the midst of all this trouble, what he did when he received the news was he turned to the wall and prayed. He turned and he turned, and he was turning his situation to God. What do you do when you receive some news that just made you upset, that hurt you? What do you do when God allows something to happen to you that you really didn't care for? That should not stop you from turning the situation over to the Lord. That shouldn't stop you from following God. The Bible says Hezekiah followed God. He followed God. He held on fast to God and followed him. That's what made him stand out in his reign. He followed God no matter what you're going through, hold on to the Lord. No matter what you're going through, keep on holding, keep on fighting, and keep on following. I know God hurt you, but keep following him. I know he upset you, but keep on following him. I know he hurt your feelings. You big mad, you salty, you bitter, you upset. You didn't know his hand was going to move the way it moved, but it did anyway. But keep on following God. Follow the Lord no matter where you go. Follow the Lord. In the midst of his feelings, he turned to the Lord. He turned to the wall and prayed. So that means he didn't want Isaiah to see what he about to do. He went to private. He turned to the wall of all things. He didn't go out, make a big announcement, and I'm about to ask God to heal me. No, God, remember me, oh Lord. Just remember. Remember all that I've done. Remember how I walked with you faithfully. Remember all the work I did for you. Just remember. He didn't say, now heal me, guys. He said, just remember. But God knows our heart. God knows what he really wanted. God knows what you really want. Man, look at the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. But his prayer, it was short, it was sweet, but it was powerful. It was short, it was sweet, but it was impactful. It was short. He didn't have to speak in tongues. He didn't have a big old shout, scream to say, oh, Lord, remember all that I've done. The fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much. It was a small, little, strong prayer. But it got God's attention. It got God's attention. The prayer of a righteous man. The fervent prayer of a righteous man. See, here's the thing about storms and trials and bad news. See, that stuff just activates what's already on the inside of you. See, Hezekiah was already righteous. He already had a relationship with God. He already walked with God, talked to God. So when he received some news that he didn't really care for, he knew what to do. I'm going to turn to God. See, when he got news he was about to die, that's not when he got righteous. See, a lot of people, when they see things coming to an end, they start doing right. They get ahead of, hey, they thinking about firing you. Oh, I need to start coming in on time now. Like they start trying to get right when they hear, okay, my time at this job about to come to an end. I need to get my act together. No, Hezekiah already had. Now he's human, make mistakes, but he already had his act together. Yeah. And so it was nothing for him to turn to God. But some people get their act together when they see things coming to an end. Man, it happens a lot, like I say, in positions, in corporate America. I still remember like working with people. I'm like, hey, I'm hearing talks that they about to let you go, bro. Why? Because you always late. Oh, I should start coming on time, huh? Yeah, you should get your act together. And then they get to act together for about 2 weeks. It don't last long because guess what? It's not a change of heart. You're just trying to put on the act so you can keep your job. Not to change your heart. But the fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much, and it got God's attention, and it got an immediate response from the Lord. Because the part that really stood out, say before Isaiah, if you read more into the text, before Isaiah had gone out, before Isaiah had left the premises, God said, hold up. Go back and tell the leader of my people, Hezekiah, that I heard his prayer and I seen his tears. Now, this sermon is not a promise that you will get immediate response from your prayer. But this sermon is a promise that God heard your prayer. And God hears your prayers. God hears it. That's right. God hears your prayer. He hears every prayer. All because he don't act on it when you want him to act on it does not mean he didn't hear it. See, sometimes he has to delay his response for a reason. But in this situation, Hezekiah got an immediate response from the Lord. Before Isaiah left the premises, God spoke to Isaiah and said, turn around and tell Hezekiah, I will heal him. I heard his prayer, I've seen his tears, and I will heal you. I heard your prayer, I've seen your tears, and I heal you. So I heard your prayer, but not only did I hear your prayer, I've seen your tears. And the crazy part about seeing tears is that the text says that he turned to the wall and cried. He turned to the wall and wept bitterly. So nobody physically seen his tears, but God did. And God sees every tear that you cry. Those bitter tears, those tears of pain, those tears of hurt, those tears of bitterness, he sees those tears. When nobody else sees those tears you crying, God sees it. God sees those tears. And that's why I like how David wrote in the 56 Psalms, you keep track of all my sorrows, and you have collected all my tears in your bottle. That's right. David is saying he collects the tears in a bottle. And at this time, David was going through a very difficult time of his life. He was going through he was just captured by the Philistines. He was a prisoner of war. He was alone, desperate, and afraid. Have you ever felt in life that you was alone, desperate, and afraid? And he was alone, desperate, and afraid. So of course he cried. We're human. We're going to cry. And he said, God, store my tears in a bottle and recorded each one in his book. Yep. God collect every tear that you cry. So in the act, that's an act of remembrance. He knows the number of hairs on your head, and he knows the number of tears you cried. Now, I know I don't have a lot of hair, but I have a lot of tears. Those tears that you've been crying when no one is looking, he saw them. Those tears you've been crying of bitterness, of resentment, of unforgiveness. Like a lot of people cry, you want to forgive someone, but you were so hurt that it's hard for you to forgive. And that's going to come into this series in Bitter Direct because we need to forgive. But as I close, I want to remind y'all that God sees those tears. He heard your prayer. He's seen those tears. And so when God permits something in your life that made you upset, turn to him. I know he hurt you. Turn to him. Turn to his ways are not our ways. So we don't really know. We don't see in the full run how things will work out. But just know, turn to him and pray, and he's going to hear your prayer. You don't have to speak in tongues. You don't got to scream and shout. Just say, God, remember. Just remember me. Just remember. Please, God, remember. Remember. Remember all that I've done. Just remember me. And Hezekiah is saying, just remember me. Remember how I walked with you, how I talked with you, how I was obedient. Remember. And don't let that bitterness in your heart overlook the kindness of the Lord. Yeah. Don't let the bitterness of your heart, the saltiness that you're having, overlook the love that God has for you. Yeah. Overlook his grace. Overlook his mercy. Because if he allowed it to happen to you, it was for his purpose. Yeah. If he allowed something to happen to you, it was in his will for your life. I don't know why. It's hard to understand, but that's God. We're not going to understand every single thing he does. We're not going to understand every single way his hand moves, but that should not make us not love God and love all that he does for us. Feeling salty. So if you've been feeling salty for a while by what God has done and allowed to happen in your life, turn it to him anyway. Turn to him anyway. Turn to him anyway. Let's give God some praise. Give God some praise. Give God some praise.